The 16th Legion's beginnings were carved from the blood-soaked soil of Terra during the latter stages of the Unification Wars, when the Emperor's vision of a united humanity first took tangible form. Unlike some of their brother legions whose origins remained shrouded in mystery, the 16th's recruitment source was well documented: the techno-barbarian tribes of Old Albia, a region once known as the British Isles in ancient Terra. These warriors were renowned for their tenacity, martial prowess, and an unbreakable fighting spirit that had allowed them to resist the Emperor's forces longer than most other techno-barbarian realms. When the Albian tribes finally bent the knee to the master of mankind, they did not come as defeated enemies but as respected adversaries. The Emperor, recognizing the potential in these fierce warriors, drew heavily from their ranks to bolster the 16th Legion. The Albians brought with them a warrior culture steeped in ancient traditions of brotherhood and loyalty, traits that would later become hallmarks of the Legion's character. Their resistance to imperial rule had been fierce and calculated, displaying tactical acumen that the Emperor deemed valuable for his transhuman warriors. The genetic material used to create the 16th's gene seed came directly from the Emperor's laboratories beneath the Himalaysian mountains, where the Primarch project had been conducted. Though their Primarch had been scattered to the stars, along with his brothers, by the machinations of the ruinous powers, the genetic template remained pure and potent. The implantation process proved remarkably successful with the Albian recruits, resulting in a higher than average acceptance rate and fewer complications than many other legions experienced in their early formations. During the final years of the Unification Wars, the 16th Legion quickly established themselves as masters of shock assault tactics. Their approach to warfare was direct and overwhelming. They would identify the enemy's strongest point and strike it with such ferocity that the remainder of the opposition would crumble in the face of their onslaught. This approach earned them a fearsome reputation even among the other early Space Marine legions. Where the Warhounds were known for their berserker rage and the Dark Angels for their knightly discipline, the 16th became synonymous with precision brutality, calculated violence applied at exactly the right moment to shatter an enemy's will to fight. The Legion's early heraldry reflected their martial philosophy. They bore simple gray armor with minimal ornamentation, emphasizing function over form. This pragmatic approach extended to their weaponry, which favored reliability and stopping power over exotic technology. Bolters, chain weapons, and power fists became the preferred tools of the 16th, weapons that could reliably end resistance with overwhelming force. Their battle plate often bore kill markings rather than elaborate honors, simple tallies that spoke of efficiency and deadly purpose. In terms of command structure, the 16th initially adopted a fluid hierarchy that valued battlefield results over rigid adherence to protocol. Company commanders were expected to show initiative and adapt to changing circumstances rather than waiting for orders from above. This flexibility would later serve them well during the Great Crusade, allowing them to operate effectively across multiple theaters of war simultaneously. The Legion's officer corps was predominantly drawn from veteran warriors who had proven themselves through exceptional feats of arms rather than political acumen, creating a meritocracy that respected strength and tactical brilliance above all else. As the Unification Wars drew to a close and Terra came fully under the Emperor's control, the 16th Legion found themselves in a position of particular favor. The Emperor had taken note of their effectiveness and their absolute dedication to his cause. While each of the early legions had their designated roles in the Emperor's grand design, the 16th became his executioners, the final argument against those who refused compliance with the imperial truth. When the Great Crusade began in earnest and humanity's reconquest of the stars commenced, the 16th Legion was at the forefront. The Emperor himself frequently led them into battle during these early years, before the discovery of the first Primarchs. Fighting directly under the master of mankind's banner, they were often deployed against the most stubborn and dangerous human holdouts, those civilizations that refused peaceful integration into the nascent Imperium and possessed the military might to resist conventional imperial army forces. The Legion's operations during this period were characterized by overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. Unlike some of their brother legions who might be deployed for extended campaigns or garrison duties, the 16th specialized in rapid decapitation strikes. They would identify an enemy's command structure, defensive strongpoints, or critical infrastructure, and eliminate these targets with such speed and violence that resistance would collapse before it could properly organize. One notable example occurred in the Cerberus Rebellion, where a coalition of techno-feudal worlds had amassed a significant military force capable of threatening Imperial supply lines. Rather than engaging in a protracted campaign that might last years, the 16th deployed their entire strength directly against the rebel leadership. Drop pods and assault craft tore through defensive cordons to deliver the Emperor's transhuman warriors directly into the heart of enemy territory. Within 18 hours, the rebellion's military command was eliminated, their central fortress reduced to rubble, and their armies left leaderless and in disarray. The remaining Imperial forces merely had to accept the surrenders that followed. This pattern repeated across dozens of worlds in the early Great Crusade. The 16th became known for resolving conflicts that might have bogged down other forces for years. Their approach was not without criticism. Some among the other legions considered their methods overly direct and lacking in strategic subtlety. The 16th response to such criticisms was typically pragmatic. Results spoke for themselves. The legion's culture during this pre-Primarch period was distinctly utilitarian. While other legions developed elaborate traditions and rituals, the 16th maintained a focus on martial efficiency above all else. They measured themselves by victory tallies and compliance rates rather than pageantry or elaborate honors. This is not to say they lacked brotherhood. Indeed, the bonds between battle brothers of the 16th were renowned for their strength. These bonds, however, were forged in the crucible of combat rather than ceremonial traditions. Training regimens within the legion emphasized adaptability and initiative. Junior officers were frequently placed in command of small detachments and expected to complete objectives with minimal oversight. This approach produced leaders who could think independently and adapt to rapidly changing battlefield conditions, a quality that would serve them well throughout the Great Crusade. The 16th's relationship with the Imperial army forces they fought alongside was complex. While they respected competence wherever they found it, there existed an unmistakable separation between the transhuman Astartes and their mortal counterparts. The 16th did not engage in the outright disdain that characterized some legions' attitudes toward baseline humans, but neither did they go out of their way to form bonds with the mortal soldiers. They were the Emperor's angels of death, and this identity remained paramount. Notable among the early commanders of the 16th was Lord Commander Eacton Cruz, who would later bear the moniker, the Half-Herd, during Horus's leadership. Even in these early days, Cruz displayed the tenacity and tactical acumen that would allow him to survive the coming centuries. Other prominent officers included Sergeant Zavire Jubal, whose close-quarters combat expertise would become legendary within the Legion, and Captain Erida Wren, whose precision drop pod assaults became a template for Legion operations. The 16th's arsenal during this period was predominantly composed of standard Legion equipment, though they showed a preference for weapons that delivered overwhelming stopping power. Volkite weapons were prized for their ability to reduce targets to ash, while heavy bolters and missile launchers featured prominently in their support squads. Their armory contained relatively few ritual weapons or artifacts compared to legions like the Dark Angels or Emperor's Children. Each piece of wargear was valued for its practical application rather than its ceremonial significance. As the Great Crusade expanded and the Emperor's attention was increasingly divided among the myriad demands of building his Imperium, the 16th continued to operate with deadly efficiency. However, without their Primarch's guidance, they remained incomplete, a weapon of tremendous power lacking its true wielder. Their gene seed called out for its progenitor, and the warriors of the 16th, though they might not have articulated it as such, awaited the leader who would elevate them from efficient killers to something truly transcendent. This period of waiting came to an end when the Emperor's forces made contact with the world of Thonia, a planet in Terra's stellar vicinity that had somehow escaped detection during the Age of Strife. Thonia was a mining world whose resources had been nearly depleted. its population living in vast tunnel cities beneath the barren surface. It was here that Horus, Primarch of the 16th Legion, had been raised from infancy to adulthood. Unlike many of his brother Primarchs who were discovered later in the Great Crusade, Horus had spent considerable time at the Emperor's side before taking command of his legion. He had learned warfare directly from the Master of Mankind, absorbing strategic and tactical lessons that no other being in the galaxy could claim to have received. When he finally took command of the 16th Legion, he found warriors whose natural tendencies already aligned with his own approach to warfare: direct, efficient, and overwhelming. The 16th stood on the cusp of transformation. They had established themselves as among the most effective fighting forces in the Emperor's service, but their true potential remained unrealized. With the discovery of their Primarch, the Legion would soon undergo a metamorphosis that would elevate them to new heights of martial glory, and eventually to infamy that would echo through the millennia. The proximity of Thonia to Terra remains one of the great ironies of the Primarch project. While some of the Emperor's gene sons were hurled to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, Horus landed on a world that had existed in Terra's shadow since time immemorial. Thonia was no paradise, a planet mined to near hollowness, its surface barren and hostile, its population dwelling in sprawling subterranean tunnel cities that spiraled deep into the planetary crust. These tunnels, once industrial arteries for resource extraction, had devolved into gang territories where survival depended on strength, cunning, and ruthlessness. Into this brutal environment came the infant Primarch. Unlike the legends that would surround many of his brothers, tales of being raised by noble foster parents or strange Xenos creatures, Horus's early life was remarkably mundane in its harshness. He grew among the gangers of Thonia, a child who matured with unnatural speed and displayed capabilities that set him apart from his peers. The exact circumstances of his discovery by the local population remain unrecorded, but what is known is that Horus rose quickly through the hierarchies of Thonian gang society. By adolescence, Horus had already taken control of his first gang, displaying tactical acumen that allowed his followers to claim new territory and resources. The young Primarch learned early lessons in leadership, how to inspire loyalty, when to show mercy, and when merciless violence was the only language understood. These formative experiences shaped Horus's approach to warfare and leadership, creating a commander who understood the value of personal bonds between warriors and the psychology of both allies and enemies. Thonian gang culture revolved around a harsh code of honor. Debts were always paid, oaths were binding unto death, and leadership was earned through demonstration of superior ability rather than birthright. These values would later manifest in the Legion culture Horus fostered: meritocratic advancement, unbreakable brotherhood, and pragmatic approaches to achieving objectives. The future Warmaster's upbringing gave him insight into human nature that many of his brother Primarchs, raised in more isolated or rarefied circumstances, would never fully grasp. The exact timing of the Emperor's arrival on Thonia and his discovery of Horus remains a subject of debate among Imperial historians. Some accounts suggest that Horus was still relatively young, perhaps the equivalent of a human teenager, while others indicate he had already reached full physical maturity and controlled significant territory within Thonia's labyrinthine underhives. What is certain is that the Emperor recognized his gene son immediately, and likewise, Horus felt an instant connection to the Master of Mankind. Their first meeting was not recorded by witnesses, but the aftermath was clear. Horus left Thonia with the Emperor, the first of the scattered Primarchs to be reunited with his creator. This status as first found would shape much of Horus's identity and relationship with both the Emperor and his eventually discovered brothers. For years, Horus stood as the Emperor's only recovered son, fighting at his side, learning directly from the Master of Mankind in a way that none of his brothers would experience. The relationship between the Emperor and Horus during these early years was the closest thing to a true father-son bond that the notoriously distant Emperor would ever display. Horus accompanied the Emperor on campaigns across the nascent Imperium, observing firsthand how the Master of Mankind conducted diplomacy, warfare, and the complex business of forging a galactic empire. The Emperor shared knowledge with Horus that he would never impart to his other sons: strategic insights, technological understanding, and perspectives on the human condition that spanned millennia of experience. For his part, Horus proved an exceptional student. His natural charisma and tactical genius flourished under the Emperor's tutelage. He absorbed not just the Emperor's strategic and tactical teachings, but also his vision for humanity's future. Horus became the embodiment of the imperial truth, rational, secular, and focused on humanity's manifest destiny among the stars. The Primarch embraced the Emperor's dream with the fervor of a true believer, seeing himself as the instrument through which this new golden age would be realized. This period of apprenticeship lasted until the Emperor deemed Horus ready to take command of his legion. The introduction of Primarch to legion was a carefully orchestrated affair. The 16th had already built a formidable reputation through their service in the early Great Crusade, but they had done so without the guiding hand of their gene father. Now, they would meet the being whose DNA had shaped them into transhuman warriors. The formal assumption of command took place in the Serenity Hall of the Imperial Palace on Terra. The 16th Legion assembled in full ceremonial armor, their gray plate polished to a mirror shine, their weapons presented with precision. Horus arrived flanked by custodians, his imposing physique dwarfing even the transhuman warriors who carried his genetic legacy. The Emperor himself presided over the ceremony, publicly transferring command of the Legion to his son. Horus addressed his Legion with characteristic directness. He acknowledged their achievements and the reputation they had built, but made clear that under his leadership, they would reach heights of martial glory previously unimagined. He spoke not as a distant commander, but as one who understood the warrior's heart, promising battles worthy of their abilities and conquests that would etch their names into imperial history. It was during this ceremony that the Emperor bestowed a new name upon the 16th Legion. They would no longer be simply the 16th, but would henceforth be known as the Luna Wolves. This name commemorated one of the Emperor and Horus's early victories together, the pacification of Luna's gene cults during the closing stages of the Unification Wars. The name carried symbolic weight. The wolf, an apex predator, patient in the hunt but devastating in the attack, perfectly encapsulated the Legion's approach to warfare. The Luna Wolves embraced their new identity with enthusiasm. Their armor, previously an unadorned gray, now incorporated the iconography of the wolf. Their Legion symbol became the wolf's head, snarling in profile, representing the predatory nature of their combat doctrine. Some veterans incorporated actual wolf pelts into their wargear, though these were typically from Terran stock rather than Thonian fauna, as the mining world had long since lost most of its surface ecosystems. Horus's assumption of command brought immediate changes to the Legion's structure and culture. While he respected the traditions and capabilities the Luna Wolves had developed in his absence, he recognized areas where improvement was possible. His first act was to reorganize the Legion's command structure, creating a more streamlined chain of command that emphasized flexibility and initiative while maintaining clear lines of authority. The Primarch instituted regular war councils where company captains could speak freely, offering tactical insights and raising concerns without fear of rebuke. This open exchange of ideas fostered an environment where innovation flourished and the best strategies could emerge regardless of their source. Horus would listen to all perspectives before making decisions, but once his course was set, he expected absolute commitment to execution. Perhaps the most significant cultural change Horus brought to the Luna Wolves was the concept of the Mournival. This body, consisting of 4 captains who served as the Primarch's closest advisors, was neither an official part of the Legion's command structure nor a mere ceremonial institution. The Mournival members represented different perspectives within the Legion and were expected to speak truth to their Primarch, even when that truth might be unwelcome. They served as Horus's conscience, sounding board, and most trusted lieutenants. The original Mournival consisted of captains selected for their complementary personalities and perspectives. While historical records vary on the exact composition of the first Mournival, what is clear is that Horus chose warriors who would challenge him and each other, creating a dynamic that prevented strategic stagnation and kept the Primarch connected to the pulse of his Legion. Tactically, Horus refined the Luna Wolves' already formidable approach to warfare. The Legion had established a reputation for identifying and striking at an enemy's strongest point, what they termed the Spirit approach. Horus embraced this doctrine, but added layers of sophistication. Under his guidance, the Luna Wolves developed complex feints and multi-vector assaults that would misdirect enemy forces before the true Spirit thrust delivered the killing blow. The Primarch emphasized the importance of adaptability in combat. While the Luna Wolves maintained their preference for direct assault tactics, Horus ensured they were equally capable of siege warfare, void combat, and compliance actions that required diplomatic finesse rather than brute force. This versatility made the Luna Wolves one of the most complete fighting forces in the Great Crusade, capable of handling any mission the Emperor assigned them. Horus also introduced elements of Chthonian gang culture into the Legion's traditions. The concept of the warrior lodge entered Luna Wolves' practice in formal brotherhoods where rank was temporarily set aside and Astartes could speak as equals. These lodges served as pressure valves for the intense discipline of Legion life and fostered bonds between battle brothers that transcended the formal command structure. The lodges practiced initiation rituals derived from Chthonian gang ceremonies, creating sacred spaces where even the lowest-ranked battle brother could speak his mind to a senior captain without fear of reprisal. Equipment and wargear saw upgrades under Horus's direction. While the Luna Wolves had always favored reliable, hard-hitting weapons, the Primarch introduced more tactical variety to their arsenal. Specialized assault units received jump packs and master-crafted melee weapons, while fire support squads were equipped with the latest heavy weapons from the Forges of Mars. Horus maintained personal relationships with several Mechanicum Archmagi, ensuring his legion received priority access to new technologies and weapon systems as they were developed. The Luna Wolves' flagship, the battle barge Vengeful Spirit, underwent extensive modifications to serve as Horus's mobile headquarters. The vessel's command deck was redesigned to facilitate the Primarch's preferred style of fleet management, with hololithic displays and communication systems that allowed him to coordinate multiple battle groups across vast distances. The ship's interior reflected the Luna Wolves' growing sense of martial pride, with trophy halls displaying conquered banners and weapons taken from compliant worlds. Recruitment patterns shifted under Horus's command. While the Luna Wolves had previously drawn aspirants primarily from Terra, the Primarch established Chthоnia as their primary recruitment world. The harsh conditions and gang warfare of the mining world produced candidates who already possessed many of the qualities Horus valued: resilience, tactical thinking, and the ability to function as part of a tightly knit team. The cultural influence of Chthonian recruits gradually permeated the Legion, with their distinctive dialect and combat slang becoming common throughout the ranks. The Luna Wolves' combat doctrine under Horus emphasized overwhelming force, applied with surgical precision. The Primarch himself often led the Spirit assault, teleporting or drop-podding directly into the heart of enemy resistance, alongside his elite Justaeran Terminators. This personal leadership had a profound psychological impact on both his warriors and their enemies. Luna Wolves fought with redoubled vigor when their Primarch shared their dangers, while opposing forces often broke at the mere sight of the towering Primarch leading the assault. In Void Warfare, Horus introduced the Wolves' Teeth formation, a dispersed fleet approach that would appear disorganized to enemy augurs, but could rapidly consolidate into devastating attack vectors on the Primarch's command. This tactic proved particularly effective against Xeno's fleets that relied on predictive logic engines to anticipate Imperial Navy movements. With Horus at their helm, the Luna Wolves transformed from an effective fighting force into the undisputed vanguard of the Great Crusade. The Emperor's favored son led his legion to new heights of martial achievement, pioneering tactics that would later be adopted throughout the Legion's Astartes. Chief among these was the refinement of the Spirit assault doctrine, a strategy that would become synonymous with the Luna Wolves' approach to warfare. The Spirit was deceptive in its apparent simplicity. At its core, the tactic involved identifying the enemy's command structure or strategic linchpin and delivering an overwhelming force precisely at that point. What distinguished Horus's implementation was the psychological dimension he added. The Primarch understood that warfare was as much about breaking an enemy's will as destroying their capacity to fight. By striking directly at what the enemy valued most, the Luna Wolves could induce a cascading collapse of morale that often led to bloodless compliances. This approach was demonstrated with devastating effectiveness during the compliance of 14020, a technologically advanced human civilization that had maintained independence throughout the Age of Strife. Initial imperial diplomatic overtures had been met with stubborn resistance and subtle sabotage. After 3 months of fruitless negotiations, Horus authorized direct military intervention, rather than engaging in a protracted campaign that would damage the valuable infrastructure of 14020. Horus identified the ruling oligarchy as the obstacle to compliance. The Luna Wolves strike was precisely calibrated. A single company of Astartes, led by Horus himself, teleported directly into the central governance spire during a full assembly of the planet's leadership. The psychological impact was immediate. The sight of the Primarch, towering over mortal men, accompanied by his transhuman warriors in gleaming white armor, shattered the oligarch's confidence. Within 6 hours, the planet had surrendered without a single shot fired. This bloodless compliance exemplified Horus's strategic philosophy: maximum impact with minimum expenditure of resources. Not all campaigns ended so cleanly. The Amalgamated Worlds, a confederation of 15 human-settled planets united under a theocratic regime hostile to the imperial truth, required a more comprehensive application of force. The Confederation maintained a substantial military, including warp-capable vessels and cybernetically enhanced soldiers who could pose a genuine threat to Imperial army formations. Horus approached this campaign with characteristic thoroughness. He deployed the Luna Wolves in full strength, supplemented by elements of the Imperial army and Mechanicum support. The Primarch divided his legion into attack groups, each assigned to neutralize specific strategic assets across multiple worlds simultaneously. This prevented the Confederation from concentrating their defense and created the impression of an even larger Imperial force. The decisive moment came at the Battle of Jertal, the Confederation's capital world. Horus led the main spear-tip assault against the theocratic palace, while Captain Sergar Targost's company executed a diversionary attack against the planetary defense batteries. The Confederation's High Ecclesiarch, expecting the main thrust to target their military infrastructure, had concentrated his elite guards at these locations. When Horus's force smashed through the relatively undermanned palace defenses, the psychological shock rippled throughout the Confederation's command structure. Within 3 weeks, all 15 worlds had submitted to Imperial compliance. The campaign demonstrated Horus's ability to orchestrate complex, multi-vector operations across an entire star system, a skill that would later justify his elevation to Warmaster. The organizational structure of the Luna Wolves under Horus reflected the Primarch's emphasis on tactical flexibility and clear chains of command. While adhering to the broad outlines of the Principia Bellicosa that governed all Space Marine legions, Horus implemented several distinctive features that enhanced his legion's combat effectiveness. At the highest level, the Luna Wolves were divided into companies, each comprising approximately 1,000 Astartes. Company captains enjoyed considerable autonomy, with the authority to conduct independent operations when necessary. This decentralized command structure allowed the Legion to prosecute multiple compliance actions simultaneously, greatly increasing their operational tempo. Companies were further divided into tactical squads of 10 Astartes, led by sergeants who were expected to show initiative rather than blindly following orders. This emphasis on tactical flexibility permeated all levels of the Legion, creating a force that could rapidly adapt to changing battlefield conditions without awaiting instructions from higher authorities. Elite formations within the Legion included the Justaran Terminators, who served as Horus's personal bodyguard and spearhead for the most dangerous assaults, and the Cachelan Reaver squads, who specialized in close-quarters fighting and boarding actions. These elite units typically comprised veterans with decades of combat experience, and selection for their ranks was considered a mark of exceptional skill and courage. Perhaps the most distinctive feature of the Luna Wolves organization was the Mournival. This informal advisory body consisted of 4 captains who represented different aspects of the Legion's character. Traditionally, these aspects were described as wisdom, aggression, diplomacy, and raw martial prowess, though the specific balance varied depending on the individuals who held the positions. During the height of the Great Crusade, the Mournival consisted of Captains Ezekiel Abaddon, Tarek Torgeddon, Horus Aximand, and Garvil Loken. Each brought a distinct perspective to the Primarchs' councils. Abaddon embodied the Legion's martial pride and aggression. Torgeddon provided levity and a connection to the common Astartes. Aximand offered thoughtful strategic analysis, and Loken represented the idealistic adherence to the imperial truth that Horus himself championed. The Mournival's purpose extended beyond mere tactical advice. Its members were expected to speak freely to Horus, offering criticism when necessary, and ensuring the Primarch remained connected to the pulse of his legion. This honest council served as a check against the isolation that sometimes affected Primarchs due to their superhuman nature and exalted position. The Mournival also served a diplomatic function, representing Horus in negotiations with other imperial forces and compliant worlds. Their status as the Primarch's chosen advisors gave their words weight even when dealing with high-ranking officials of the imperial army or planetary governors. Company formations within the Luna Wolves followed a pattern that maximized tactical flexibility. While maintaining the standard tactical, assault, and devastator squad designations common to all legions, Horus encouraged mixed unit deployments that combined different specialists into balanced battle groups. This approach allowed each strike force to handle a variety of combat situations without requiring reinforcement. The Legion's equipment reflected their direct approach to warfare. Luna Wolves favored reliable, hard-hitting weapons over exotic technology. Bolters remained the staple armament, often modified with specialized ammunition types depending on the target. In close combat, chain weapons and power swords predominated, with officers typically wielding master-crafted versions that incorporated Thonian design elements. After their renaming as the Luna Wolves, the Legion adopted a white color scheme for their armor, moving away from the gray they had worn previously. This stark coloration made them instantly recognizable on the battlefield and had a psychological impact on both allies and enemies. The sight of white armored Astartes advancing in perfect formation became a powerful symbol of imperial might throughout the Great Crusade. The Luna Wolves' relationships with other legions were complex and varied. As the first legion to be reunited with their Primarch, they initially enjoyed a status that generated both respect and resentment among their cousins. Horus's diplomatic skill, however, generally allowed him to maintain productive relationships with most of his brother Primarchs and their legions. The Luna Wolves shared particularly close bonds with the World Eaters, Emperor's Children, and Word Bearers. The relationship with Angron's World Eaters was based on mutual respect for martial prowess, though Horus privately expressed concern about the World Eaters' increasing brutality and the neural implants that fueled their rage. Joint operations between the two legions typically assigned the World Eaters to frontal assault roles, while the Luna Wolves executed more precise strikes against command assets. With Fulgrim's Emperor's Children, the relationship was one of friendly rivalry. Both legions strove for perfection, though they defined it differently. The Emperor's Children through flawless execution and aesthetic refinement, the Luna Wolves through tactical innovation and decisive results. Horus and Fulgrim maintained a close personal friendship, with the Phoenician being one of the few Primarchs who could match Horus's charisma in public forums. The bond with Lorgar's word-bearers was perhaps the most complex. After the censure of Monarchia, when the Emperor had publicly rebuked Lorgar for spreading religious worship, Horus had shown understanding and support for his brother's humiliation. This compassion earned Horus the lasting gratitude of both Lorgar and the Word-Bearers' Legion. Joint campaigns often saw the Word-Bearers handling the consolidation phase of compliance actions after the Luna Wolves had achieved military victory. These inter-legion relationships proved valuable during complex compliance actions that required diverse approaches. The compliance of Crypt, for example, saw the Luna Wolves, Emperor's Children, and World Eaters working in concert to bring a heavily fortified system into the Imperial fold. Each legion performed according to their strengths, the Emperor's Children executing precision strikes against defensive emplacements, the World Eaters breaking entrenched resistance through sheer ferocity, and the Luna Wolves delivering the decisive blow to the planetary leadership. The Luna Wolves' approach to void warfare deserves special mention. Horus pioneered several fleet formations that maximized the impact of Astartes' boarding actions against enemy vessels. The crescent deployment became a standard tactic, wherein Luna Wolves' strike cruisers would form a curved line that forced enemy ships to choose between presenting their vulnerable flanks or being herded toward the guns of the Vengeful Spirit, Horus's massive flagship. Boarding actions were conducted with the same precision as planetary assaults. Terminator squads would teleport directly to enemy bridges or engineering sections, while Catchalan Reavers would launch boarding torpedoes against secondary targets. The psychological impact of Astartes materializing directly on a vessel's command deck often led to immediate surrenders, preserving valuable ships for Imperial service. Throughout these campaigns, Horus continued to refine the Luna Wolves' combat doctrine. The Primarch was never satisfied with past successes and constantly sought to improve his legion's effectiveness. After each major engagement, he would convene analysis sessions where officers would dissect the operation, identifying both successes to be replicated and failures to be corrected. This culture of continuous improvement extended to individual Astartes. The Luna Wolves maintained extensive training facilities aboard their fleet vessels, allowing warriors to hone their skills even during warp transit between campaigns. Simulation chambers, dueling circles, and tactical analysis rooms were in constant use, reflecting Horus's belief that excellence required perpetual effort. The Luna Wolves Legion was defined not only by its tactical doctrine and battlefield accomplishments, but also by the exceptional individuals who filled its ranks. At the forefront stood First Captain Ezekiel Abaddon, commander of the First Company and leader of the elite Justaran Terminators. Physically imposing even by Astartes standards, Abaddon cut an intimidating figure with his shaved head, severe features, and the distinctive topknot that marked him as Thonian-born. His naturally dark complexion bore numerous battle scars, each telling the story of a campaign where lesser warriors would have fallen. The Justaran under Abaddon's command represented the pinnacle of the Luna Wolves' martial prowess. Clad in tactical dreadnought armor painted jet black in contrast to the Legion's white livery, these veterans served as Horus's personal honor guard and the Legion's most formidable shock troops. Their black armor bore golden trim, and the Eye of Horus emblazoned on the left shoulder pad, marking them as warriors who had earned the right to wear the Warmaster's personal sigil. Justaran Terminators specialized in Zone Mortalis operations and shipboard actions, where their heavily reinforced armor provided crucial protection in confined spaces. Their standard armament consisted of combi bolters and power fists, though many veterans wielded more specialized weapons, including lightning claws, chain fists, and heavy flamers. The psychological impact of these black-armored giants teleporting directly into enemy command centers could not be overstated. Many compliance actions ended immediately upon their arrival. Tactical doctrine for the Justaran emphasized overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. Unlike some Terminator formations in other legions that relied on grinding advanced tactics, Abaddon trained his warriors to strike with surprising speed and coordination. Justaran squads practiced teleport insertions extensively, learning to materialize in perfect formation despite the disorienting effects of teleportation. This expertise allowed them to secure objectives within seconds of arrival, often before defenders could organize an effective response. Abaddon himself exemplified the Luna Wolves' martial ethos. Utterly devoted to Horus, he channeled his natural aggression into disciplined violence that made him perhaps the deadliest individual warrior in the Legion after the Primarch himself. His personal weapon, the demon sword Drachnian, would not come into his possession until much later, but during the Great Crusade, he wielded a master-crafted power sword and combi bolter with devastating effect. His battlefield prowess was matched only by his tactical acumen, which earned him his position as first captain despite his relatively young age compared to some veterans. The relationship between Abaddon and Horus transcended the typical bond between Primarch and Astartes. Rumors persisted that Abaddon might share some genetic connection to the Primarch beyond the standard gene seed implantation, though such speculation was never confirmed. What was certain was that Abaddon viewed Horus with a devotion that bordered on reverence, while Horus treated his first captain with a level of trust and respect afforded to few others. Alongside Abaddon in the Mournival stood Tarik Torgadin, captain of the Second Company. Where Abaddon was stern and intense, Torgadin was known for his irreverent humor and easy manner. Tall and lean for an Astartes, with a shaved head except for a small scalp lock, Torgadin possessed a disarming smile that often caught newcomers off guard. This affable exterior concealed a razor-sharp tactical mind and exceptional combat skills that had earned him his captain's rank. Torgadin's value to the Mournival lay in his ability to speak truth to power without causing offense. His humor allowed him to deliver criticism or uncomfortable observations in ways that diffused tension rather than exacerbating it. This skill proved invaluable during heated strategic debates, where Torgadin could redirect conversations that threatened to devolve into unproductive arguments. In battle, Torgadin led from the front, typically armed with a power sword and bolt pistol. He favored rapid assault tactics and was known for his ability to identify and exploit weaknesses in enemy formations. His Second Company specialized in breaching actions, often deploying alongside destroyer squads to create entry points for follow-up forces. Torgadin maintained close relationships with warriors throughout the Legion's ranks, regularly joining common Astartes in the practice cages or mess halls when not on campaign. The third member of the Mournival, Captain Little Horus Aximand, commanded the Fifth Company with quiet efficiency. His nickname stemmed from his uncanny physical resemblance to the Primarch, a similarity so pronounced that it occasionally caused confusion among those unfamiliar with the Legion. Aximand stood shorter than many of his fellow captains, but carried himself with a dignified bearing that commanded respect. Aximand's tactical approach emphasized careful planning and coordination. His company frequently operated in support roles, providing covering fire for other units or securing strategic objectives after initial assaults. This methodical approach made the Fifth Company less celebrated than some of their more aggressive counterparts, but their reliability and consistent performance earned them Horus's trust for critical assignments. Within the Mournival, Aximand often served as a mediating influence between Abaddon's aggression and Torgadin's irreverence. His thoughtful analysis and strategic insight provided balance to the Council's deliberations. Aximand's personal combat style mirrored his tactical approach, economical, precise, and devastatingly effective when required. He favored a power axe and bolt pistol, weapons that emphasized controlled application of force rather than overwhelming aggression. The final position in the Mournival was held by Captain Garville Loken of the 10th Company. A relative newcomer to the inner circle, Loken had earned his place through exceptional performance during the Whisperhead campaign. Physically, Loken epitomized the Luna Wolves' aesthetic, tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped blonde hair and regular features that reflected his Terran rather than Thonian origin. Loken's fighting style combined technical precision with adaptability. He excelled in both ranged and close combat, typically armed with a power sword and bolter. His 10th Company specialized in flexible response operations, capable of adapting to rapidly changing battlefield conditions without losing cohesion. This versatility made them valuable assets during complex compliance actions where unexpected developments were common. What distinguished Loken within the Mournival was his philosophical bent. While fully committed to the Imperial truth, he maintained a questioning mind that sometimes led him to challenge established practices within the Legion. This intellectual curiosity made him a valuable counterbalance to the more tradition-bound perspectives of his fellow Mournival members. Horus valued Loken's fresh perspective and willingness to voice concerns that others might keep to themselves. Beyond the Mournival, other notable figures shaped the Luna Wolves' character and capabilities. Captain Sergar Targost of the 7th Company served as Master of the Lodges, overseeing the network of warrior brotherhoods that existed alongside the formal command structure. Physically unremarkable by Astartes standards, Targost compensated with a charismatic presence and keen political instincts that allowed him to navigate the complex social dynamics within the Legion. The lodge system under Targost's guidance provided spaces where rank was temporarily set aside, allowing for candid discussion among battle brothers of different status. These gatherings strengthened bonds between warriors and provided valuable feedback mechanisms that kept the Legion's leadership connected to the concerns of common Astartes. Targast maintained detailed knowledge of each lodge's membership and internal dynamics, making him one of the most politically influential captains despite his relatively modest battlefield reputation. A stark contrast to the forward-looking leadership of Horus's inner circle was Captain Eacton Cruz, known throughout the Legion as the Half-Herd. One of the oldest serving officers, Cruz had led Luna Wolves' forces before Horus took command, during the early years of the Great Crusade. His weathered features and graying hair marked him as a relic of an earlier era, earning him both respect for his experience and dismissal from younger officers who considered his tactics outdated. Cruz maintained traditional practices from the Legion's formative period, including formal battle rituals and equipment maintenance protocols that had fallen out of favor under Horus's more pragmatic leadership. While some mocked these habits as antiquated, they connected the Luna Wolves to their origins and preserved institutional knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. Horus recognized this value, keeping Cruz in command of the Third Company despite pressure to replace him with a younger, more aggressive officer. The value of Cruz's experience became apparent during campaigns against enemies similar to those the Legion had faced in the early Crusade. During the compliance of Melchior, when the Luna Wolves encountered defensive systems matching those used by Terran separatists during the Unification Wars, Cruz's familiarity with these ancient technologies proved decisive. His Third Company disabled the planetary defense grid using techniques developed decades earlier, allowing the main assault force to make planetfall without casualties. Among the Legion's specialized formations, the Cachelan Reaver Squad stood out for their expertise in void warfare and boarding actions. Led by Sergeant Callus Ekadin, these veterans specialized in zero-gravity combat and breaching operations. Their armor featured additional maneuvering thrusters and magnetic boot plates that allowed them to fight effectively in environments where conventional movement was impossible. Cachelan Reavers typically deployed via boarding torpedoes, specialized assault craft that could punch through a starship's hull to deliver Astartes directly into enemy vessels. Once aboard, they would fight their way to critical systems, bridges, engine rooms, or weapons controls, to either capture the ship intact or render it combat ineffective. Their expertise in close-quarters fighting made them particularly lethal in the confined spaces of starship corridors, where their combat shotguns and breacher charges could clear resistance with brutal efficiency. Another specialized formation within the Luna Wolves was the Destroyer Cadre. These warriors employed weapons considered too indiscriminate or environmentally damaging for standard operations. Rad weapons, phosphex bombs, and Volkite weaponry capable of reducing targets to ash. Destroyers were marked by their distinctive black armor with radiation warning symbols, setting them apart from their battle brothers both visually and socially. Service in destroyer squads carried a certain stigma within the Legion. The toxic substances they handled often left permanent marks on their bodies, discolored skin, radiation burns, or other physical deformities. Many destroyers developed fatalistic attitudes, knowing that their exposure to hazardous materials would likely shorten their already dangerous lives. Despite this, competition for positions within destroyer squads remained fierce, as many Astartes considered the opportunity to wield such devastating weapons worth the personal cost. The Luna Wolves' approach to warfare relied heavily on these specialized formations working in concert. A typical compliance action might begin with destroyer squads neutralizing key defensive positions, followed by Cachelan Reavers securing strategic assets, with Justaran Terminators delivering the decisive blow to enemy leadership. This layered approach allowed the Legion to achieve compliance with minimal casualties and collateral damage, preserving valuable infrastructure and population centers for Imperial integration. The effectiveness of these elite formations stemmed not just from their specialized equipment, but from rigorous training regimens. The Luna Wolves maintained extensive practice facilities aboard their fleet vessels, including variable gravity chambers for Cachelan Reavers, hazardous environment courses for destroyers, and reinforced combat cages where Justerin could train in full Terminator plate. These facilities allowed specialists to hone their skills continuously, even during extended warp transit between campaigns. Recruitment and advancement within these elite units followed meritocratic principles. Any battle brother who demonstrated the necessary skills and temperament could aspire to join the specialized formations, regardless of origin or connections. This approach ensured that the Luna Wolves elite units comprised genuinely exceptional warriors, rather than those who had secured their positions through political maneuvering or favoritism. This meritocratic ethos extended throughout the Legion's rank structure. Horus himself regularly observed training sessions and combat operations, identifying promising warriors for promotion regardless of their current status. This hands-on approach by the Primarch ensured that talent did not go unrecognized and reinforced the Legion's identity as a force where achievement outweighed all other considerations. The Great Crusade stands as perhaps the most significant military campaign of the Great Crusade prior to the Heresy, a massive operation to eliminate the largest Orc empire encountered by Imperial forces. At its head stood the self-proclaimed warlord Urlak-Urg, a beast of extraordinary size and cunning who had united countless greenskin hordes under his banner. His domain stretched across dozens of star systems, with untold billions of Orcs at his command, and a fleet of crude but effective vessels that threatened to spill outward into neighboring sectors. The threat posed by this Xenos empire could not be overstated. Left unchecked, the Orcs would continue their exponential growth, potentially reaching a critical mass that even the combined might of the Imperium would struggle to contain. Recognizing this existential danger, the Emperor committed unprecedented resources to the campaign, including no fewer than 3 full legions, the Luna Wolves, White Scars, and Ultramarines, supported by elements from several others, alongside thousands of Imperial army regiments and Mechanicum battle groups. Horus, given overall strategic command of the operation, approached the campaign with characteristic thoroughness. Rather than attempting to engage the sprawling Orc Empire on all fronts simultaneously, he devised a strategy that would systematically isolate and eliminate key power centers while disrupting the Greenskins' ability to coordinate their forces. The Luna Wolves would form the spearhead of this effort, striking directly at Urlak-Urg's stronghold on the planet Ullener itself. The initial phases of the campaign focused on severing supply lines and communication networks between Orc-held worlds. White Scars' fast attack squadrons conducted lightning raids against convoy routes, while Ultramarines' forces established blockades around key systems. These actions forced the Orcs to commit significant resources to defensive operations, preventing them from mounting an effective counter-offensive against the gathering Imperial forces. As these preliminary operations unfolded, Horus meticulously gathered intelligence on Urlak-Urg's fortress world. Reconnaissance missions conducted by Luna Wolves scout teams provided detailed information on defensive emplacements, troop concentrations, and the layout of the massive scrap cities that dominated Ullener's surface. This intelligence proved crucial in identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited during the main assault. The battle for Ullener began with a massive orbital bombardment that targeted key defensive structures and Orc gatherings. Lance strikes from Luna Wolves' battle barges created impact zones for drop pod insertions, while Thunderhawk gunships provided close air support for the first wave of ground forces. The initial landings established a perimeter around what intelligence had identified as Urlak-Urg's primary fortress, a sprawling complex of crude but effective fortifications built from the hulls of crashed spacecraft and industrial machinery. Horus divided his forces into 3 primary attack groups. The Luna Wolves' main strength, led by the Primarch himself alongside the Justerin Terminators, would strike directly at the central fortress to eliminate Urlak-Urg and his inner circle. Jagatai Khan's White Scars would conduct wide-sweeping attacks against Orc reinforcement columns, preventing them from reaching the main battlefield. Robute Guilliman's Ultramarines would secure key strategic points throughout the surrounding territory, systematically eliminating secondary command nodes and cutting off possible retreat routes. The Luna Wolves' assault on the central fortress exemplified their spear-tip doctrine at its most refined. Rather than engaging the countless greenskins that swarmed the outer defenses, Horus led a precision strike force directly toward Urlak-Urg's command position. Terminator squads teleported into key structures, eliminating defensive emplacements from within, while assault companies in Stormbird gunships bypassed the outer walls entirely to land at predetermined points within the fortress complex. The fighting within the fortress was brutal, even by the standards of Astartes warfare. Orcs in unprecedented numbers swarmed the Luna Wolves' positions, their crude but effective weapons capable of punching through power armor at close range. What the Greenskins lacked in discipline they compensated for with sheer ferocity and numbers, forcing the Luna Wolves to fight for every meter of ground they secured. Abaddon's Justarin formed the tip of the spear dip, carving a path through the densest concentrations of orc resistance. Their black Terminator plate, scorched and dented from countless impacts, became a rallying point for Luna Wolves squads fighting through the labyrinthine interior of the fortress. Behind them came Loken's 10th Company, securing corridors and chambers as they advanced toward the central throne room where Urlak-Urg awaited. The climactic confrontation with the Orc warlord occurred in a vast chamber constructed from the command deck of an ancient capital ship. Urlak-Urg, a monster even by the standards of Orc warbosses, stood surrounded by his most formidable bodyguards, massive knobs clad in crude power armor and wielding weapons salvaged from Imperial war machines. As the Luna Wolves breached the chamber's defenses, the warlord roared a challenge that echoed throughout the fortress. Horus answered that challenge personally. The duel between Primarch and Warboss lasted mere minutes, but would be remembered as one of the most significant single combats of the Great Crusade. Urlak-Urg's immense strength and surprising speed made him a formidable opponent, but Horus fought with cold precision, systematically dismantling the Orcs' defenses before delivering a killing blow with his signature weapon, the Mace Worldbreaker. As the warlord's corpse crashed to the ground, a psychic shock rippled through the Orc forces across the planet, shattering their morale and coordination. With their leader slain and command structure in disarray, the remaining Orc forces on Ullanr devolved into disorganized mobs that could be eliminated systematically. The White Scars pursued fleeing warbands across the plains surrounding the fortress, while Ultramarines' forces secured strategic assets throughout the region. Within days, resistance on Ullanr itself had been broken, and Imperial forces began the process of expanding outward to reclaim the surrounding systems from Greenskin control. The Ullanr Crusade represented not just a military victory, but a strategic turning point in the Great Crusade. The destruction of the largest Orc empire encountered to date eliminated a major threat to Imperial expansion and freed substantial military resources for deployment elsewhere. More significantly, it demonstrated the effectiveness of the Legion's Astartes when operating in concert under unified command, a proof of concept for the military structure that would shape the remainder of the Great Crusade. In recognition of this monumental achievement, the Emperor decreed that a triumph would be held on Ullanr itself, a celebration of victory modeled after the triumphs of ancient Terra, where conquering generals would be honored for their achievements. This triumph of Ullanr would be the largest and most elaborate ceremony of its kind since the beginning of the Great Crusade, with representatives from all 18 legions in attendance alongside Imperial army commanders, Mechanicum adepts, and various dignitaries from compliant worlds. The preparations for the triumph transformed a portion of Ullanr's surface. Where Orc fortifications had stood, Imperial architects erected massive parade grounds, viewing stands, and monuments commemorating the victory. Mechanicum terraforming engines purified the soil and air, while army engineers constructed facilities to accommodate the hundreds of thousands of participants expected to attend. These preparations took months to complete, during which the Luna Wolves continued operations to secure the surrounding systems from remaining Orc forces. When the appointed day arrived, the spectacle exceeded even the most ambitious expectations. 18 Primarchs stood together for the first and only time in Imperial history, each accompanied by honor guards from their respective legions. Imperial army regiments that had distinguished themselves during the campaign paraded in perfect formation, their banners bearing the scars of hard-fought battles. Mechanicum battle automata marched in precise lockstep, while overhead, Navy vessels performed intricate maneuvers in celebration of their contribution to the victory. At the center of this unprecedented gathering stood the Emperor himself, resplendent in golden armor that seemed to radiate light across the assembled forces. Beside him stood Horus, the architect of the victory being celebrated, his white armor gleaming in the sunlight. The sight of father and son standing together at the pinnacle of their power and unity would be eternally burned into the memory of all who witnessed it, a moment when the Imperium's potential seemed limitless. The Emperor's address to the assembled forces was brief but momentous. He spoke of the Great Crusade entering a new phase, with the major Xenos threats to humanity's dominion either eliminated or contained. The time had come, he declared, for him to return to Terra to undertake a project of vital importance to humanity's future, a project that would require his full attention and presence on the throne world. This announcement sent ripples of surprise through the gathering. The Emperor had personally led the Great Crusade since its inception, his presence at the forefront of humanity's expansion, a constant that many had taken for granted. The implications of his withdrawal to Terra raised questions about the future direction and leadership of the ongoing effort to reclaim the stars for mankind. These questions were answered in the Emperor's next proclamation. Horus, his most trusted son and the architect of the Ulnar victory, would be elevated to the position of Warmaster, supreme commander of all Imperial military forces in the Emperor's absence. This unprecedented concentration of authority would allow the Great Crusade to continue under unified direction, while the Emperor pursued his mysterious work on Terra. To further mark this elevation, the Emperor decreed that the Luna Wolves would henceforth be known as the Sons of Horus, taking their name directly from their Primarch in recognition of his new status. This renaming represented an extraordinary honor, as no other legion bore the name of their Primarch so directly. It signified both the Emperor's trust in Horus and his recognition of the Legion's exemplary service throughout the Great Crusade. The reactions to these announcements varied widely among the assembled Primarchs and their legions. Some, like Sanguinius of the Blood Angels and Rogel Dorn of the Imperial Fists, openly expressed support for Horus's elevation, acknowledging his unmatched strategic acumen and diplomatic skill. Others, including Angron of the World Eaters and Perturabo of the Iron Warriors, accepted the decision with visible reservation, their own ambitions potentially thwarted by Horus's promotion. Most complex was the reaction of the Luna Wolves themselves to their renaming as the Sons of Horus. For many within the Legion, particularly those who had served since before Horus's discovery, their identity as Luna Wolves represented a proud heritage stretching back to the earliest days of the Great Crusade. The name carried with it traditions, battle honors, and a distinctive warrior ethos that some feared might be diluted or lost in the transition to a new identity. Conversely, younger Astartes, particularly those recruited from Thonia, embraced the new name enthusiastically. To them, being directly associated with their Primarch represented the highest honor imaginable. They saw the renaming not as an abandonment of tradition, but as an evolution, recognition that the Legion had grown beyond its origins to become something greater under Horus's leadership. Horus himself approached the renaming with characteristic political astuteness. While publicly embracing the honor bestowed by the Emperor, he ensured that key elements of the Luna Wolves' heritage were preserved in the transition. The wolf remained a prominent symbol in Legion iconography, though now accompanied by the Eye of Horus, an ancient Thonian symbol of watchfulness and protection that had become associated with the Primarch. The physical manifestation of this transition appeared in the Legion's heraldry. The pristine white armor that had characterized the Luna Wolves gradually incorporated elements of sea green, particularly on shoulder pauldrons and helmets. The wolf's head icon was modified to incorporate the Eye of Horus at its center, creating a distinctive emblem that honored both the Legion's past and its new identity. Veterans were permitted to maintain elements of the old heraldry alongside the new, creating a visual transition that mirrored the Legion's evolving identity. Beyond these symbolic changes, the elevation to Sons of Horus status brought practical implications for the Legion's role within the Great Crusade. As the Warmaster's own forces, they would now serve as the tip of the spear for the most strategically significant campaigns. This elevated profile brought increased scrutiny from both their brother legions and the various imperial institutions involved in the Great Crusade, from the Mechanicum to the administrative bodies that managed compliant worlds. Horus reorganized the legion's command structure to accommodate these new responsibilities. The Mournival's role expanded beyond internal advisory functions to include diplomatic missions to other legions and coordination with Imperial Army commands. Specialist officers were appointed to liaise with Mechanicum forces, naval battle groups, and the various Imperial institutions that would now fall under the Warmaster's authority. These changes transformed the Sons of Horus from merely one legion among 18 to the central coordinating force for the entire Great Crusade. The cultural shift within the Legion following the renaming manifested in subtle but significant ways. Where the Luna Wolves had prided themselves on directness and brutal efficiency, the Sons of Horus began to cultivate a more nuanced approach that reflected their Primarchs' new diplomatic responsibilities. Company captains received additional training in negotiation and statecraft, skills that had previously been considered secondary to martial prowess. The Legion's approach to compliance actions evolved to emphasize political solutions, where possible, reserving military force for situations where diplomacy failed. This evolution did not occur without internal tension. Some veterans, particularly those who had served since before Horus took command, viewed these changes with skepticism, concerned that the Legion's martial edge might be blunted by political considerations. The warrior lodges became forums for these debates, with traditionalists arguing for maintaining the direct approach that had served them well, while progressives embraced the more sophisticated methods that their new status demanded. The first cracks in Horus's relationship with the Emperor began to form shortly after the triumph at Ullanor. While outwardly the Warmaster executed his duties with characteristic efficiency, those closest to him noticed subtle changes in his demeanor. Private conversations with his inner circle increasingly focused on the Emperor's decision to return to Terra, leaving the Great Crusade in the hands of his sons, while he pursued mysterious projects that remained undisclosed even to his most trusted Primarch. This lack of transparency troubled Horus deeply. Having served as the Emperor's right hand throughout much of the Great Crusade, he had grown accustomed to being privy to the master of mankind's plans and intentions. Now, as Warmaster, he found himself responsible for implementing policies whose ultimate purpose remained unclear to him. Reports of massive construction projects on Terra and the Emperor's increasing seclusion only heightened his concerns. The Council of Nicaea proved a pivotal moment in the widening gulf between Horus and the Emperor. Convened to address the controversial use of psychic powers within the Legion's Astartes, the Council brought all 18 Primarchs together in a rare conclave. The debate centered primarily on the practices of Magnus, the Red's Thousand Sons Legion, whose extensive use of warp-based abilities had drawn criticism from more conservative elements within the Imperium, particularly Leman Russ of the Space Wolves and Mortarion of the Death Guard. Horus maintained a carefully neutral position throughout the proceedings, recognizing the political complexities involved. Privately, he saw value in the controlled use of psychic abilities as tactical assets, but also understood the concerns regarding their potential dangers. He expected the Emperor to reach a nuanced verdict that would accommodate both perspectives while providing clear guidelines for future practice. The Emperor's judgment, when delivered, struck many as unexpectedly absolute. All legions were ordered to disband their librarius divisions and cease the use of psychic abilities entirely. The Thousand Sons were specifically commanded to halt their exploration of the warp's mysteries and conform to conventional imperial doctrine. This binary solution to a complex issue surprised Horus, who had anticipated a more measured approach from the Master of Mankind. More troubling than the decision itself was the manner of its delivery. The Emperor presented his ruling as incontrovertible fact rather than reasoned judgment, brooking no discussion or appeal. This authoritarian approach seemed at odds with the more collaborative leadership style Horus had observed during their campaigns together. It reinforced his growing concern that the Emperor was changing, becoming more distant and absolute in his pronouncements, as his attention turned increasingly toward Terra. The aftermath of Nicaea created ripples throughout the legions. Magnus reluctantly ordered his 1,000 sons to comply, though many within the legion struggled to abandon practices that had defined their approach to warfare. Other legions with established librarius divisions faced similar challenges, forced to reassign trained psychers to conventional combat roles for which they were often ill-suited. The Sons of Horus, while less dependent on psychic abilities than some of their cousins, nevertheless found their tactical flexibility reduced by the loss of warp-sensitive battle brothers who had provided valuable strategic insights. Horus dutifully implemented the Emperor's decree within his own legion, but privately questioned both the wisdom of the decision and the inflexible manner of its imposition. In discussions with the Mournival, he expressed concern that the Emperor had sacrificed valuable military assets based on fear rather than rational assessment of their utility. This marked one of the first instances where Horus openly questioned the Emperor's judgment in the presence of his officers, a subtle but significant shift in his previously unwavering support for his father's decisions. The practical challenges of serving as Warmaster further strained Horus's relationship with the distant Emperor. Coordinating the efforts of 17 distinct legions, each led by a Primarch with his own temperament and ambitions, proved extraordinarily demanding. Territorial disputes between legions, disagreements over compliance methodologies, and simple personality conflicts all required Horus's intervention, often without clear guidance from Terra on how such matters should be resolved. These administrative burdens coincided with the Sons of Horus's ongoing military campaigns. The Legion continued to serve as the tip of the Imperial spear, taking on the most challenging compliance actions, while their Primarchs simultaneously managed the broader strategic direction of the Great Crusade. This dual responsibility placed enormous pressure on Horus, who increasingly relied on the Mournival and his senior captains to maintain the Legion's operational effectiveness while he attended to his Warmaster duties. It was against this backdrop of growing discontent and exhaustion that the Sons of Horus embarked on the Davin campaign, an operation that would alter the course of Imperial history. Davin itself was an unremarkable world that had been brought to compliance by the word-bearers some 40 years earlier. Reports of rebellion on Davin's moon, however, prompted Horus to personally lead a punitive expedition to restore Imperial authority in the system. The situation on Davin's moon appeared straightforward. The Imperial commander, Eugen Temba, had apparently rejected Imperial authority and established an independent fiefdom. The Sons of Horus deployed in force, expecting a relatively routine compliance action against mortal rebels. What they encountered instead defied conventional understanding. The moon's environment had transformed in disturbing ways since its initial compliance. Unnatural mists clung to the ground, while the vegetation had mutated into grotesque forms that seemed to pulse with unnatural life. More alarming were the changes observed in the rebel forces themselves. Temba's troops displayed physical mutations and fought with unnatural vigor despite injuries that should have been immediately fatal. These aberrations suggested influences beyond simple political rebellion. Horus led the initial assault personally, deploying with a strike force that included elements of the Justaran Terminators and the Mournival. The fighting was brutal and disorienting, with enemy forces emerging from the mists to engage at close quarters before withdrawing into the murk. Standard Imperial tactics proved less effective than anticipated against an enemy that seemed impervious to pain and fought with suicidal determination. The pivotal moment came when Horus confronted Eugen Temba himself within the governor's palace. The once loyal Imperial commander had undergone horrific transformation, his body bloated and distorted beyond recognition. More disturbing than these physical changes was the unnatural vitality he displayed. Wounds that should have been instantly fatal merely slowed him temporarily before sealing themselves. During this confrontation, Temba wielded an unusual weapon that would later be identified as the Anatheme, a blade of Xeno's origin with properties beyond conventional understanding. In a moment that would be replayed countless times in the memories of those present, Temba managed to breach Horus's defenses and inflict a wound with this weapon. Though seemingly minor compared to injuries the Primarch had shrugged off in previous battles, this wound resisted his transhuman healing abilities, quickly festering and spreading infection throughout his system. the Mournival extracted their wounded Primarch from the battlefield, fighting their way back to the waiting Stormbird transports. By the time they reached orbit, Horus's condition had deteriorated dramatically. The wound pulsed with unnatural energies, while the Primarch himself alternated between feverish delirium and unconsciousness. The Legion's apothecaries found themselves helpless against an affliction that defied conventional medical understanding. For several days, the Sons of Horus command structure remained in crisis as their Primarch hovered between life and death. The Mournival split on how to proceed. Abaddon and Aximand advocated returning to Terra, where the Emperor's superior knowledge might save Horus, while Torgadon and Loken urged caution, concerned about the political implications of the Warmaster appearing incapacitated before the Imperial Court. This deadlock was broken by the intervention of First Chaplain Erebus of the Word Bearers, who had been attached to Horus's command staff as a liaison. Erebus suggested an alternative approach. The Davanites themselves possessed healing traditions that might succeed where Imperial medicine had failed. Specifically, he spoke of the Serpent Lodge, a native cult whose members claimed the ability to cure afflictions of both body and spirit through their ancient rituals. The suggestion provoked intense debate among the Mournival. Loken in particular objected strongly, pointing out that turning to native superstition contradicted the imperial truth and risked legitimizing exactly the kind of cult practices the Great Crusade sought to eliminate. Abaddon, however, saw only the practical reality. Their Primarch was dying, and conventional methods had failed to arrest his decline. Ultimately, desperation outweighed ideological concerns. With Abaddon's authorization, Horus's unconscious form was transported to the temple of the Serpent Lodge on Davin's surface. The Primarch was placed upon a stone altar within the inner sanctum, surrounded by lodge members in elaborate ceremonial attire. The Sons of Horus representatives were permitted to observe, but instructed not to interfere with the healing ritual regardless of what transpired. What followed was no mere medical procedure, but a complex psychic working that operated simultaneously in physical and immaterial realms. The lodge members entered deep trance states, their consciousness reaching into the warp to guide Horus's spirit, while their physical forms maintained the connection through incantations and ritual movements around the altar. Incense burned in braziers of curious design, releasing smoke that formed patterns suggesting faces and symbols before dissipating. Unknown to the watching Astartes, this ritual did not aim to heal Horus, but to open his mind to external influences. The wound inflicted by the anatheme had created a breach in the Primarch's formidable psychic defenses, allowing direct access to his consciousness. The Serpent Lodge, a front for chaos worship that had taken root following the Word Bearer's original compliance action, exploited this vulnerability to cast Horus's spirit into the warp while his physical form remained on the altar. Within the immaterial realm, Horus experienced what he believed to be a vision of the future, a galaxy where the Emperor was worshipped as a god, where the secular imperial truth had been abandoned in favor of religious dogma, and where the Primarchs had been discarded once their usefulness ended. This vision, carefully crafted by the ruinous powers to exploit Horus's existing doubts, presented the Emperor's mysterious projects on Terra as preparation for ascension to godhood, rather than advancement of human knowledge. Most devastating was the suggestion that the Emperor had never valued Horus or his brothers as sons, but merely as tools created for specific purposes, tools that would be cast aside once the Emperor achieved his true aims. This played directly into Horus's growing sense of abandonment following the Emperor's return to Terra and the lack of transparency regarding his ultimate goals. The exact duration of this spiritual ordeal remains unknown, but when Horus finally awoke upon the altar, he appeared fully recovered from his physical wound. More significant than this apparent healing were the subtle changes in his demeanor noticed by his closest officers. The Warmaster's natural charisma seemed intensified, his presence more commanding than before. Yet underlying this enhanced authority was a new coldness, a distance that had not existed previously even in his most pragmatic moments. In the days following his recovery, Horus maintained a facade of normalcy, resuming command duties and directing the completion of the Davin compliance action. Privately, however, he began making subtle changes to Legion operations that would facilitate his emerging plans. Command protocols were modified to concentrate authority more directly in his hands, while communication with Terra became increasingly filtered through his personal staff. The warrior lodges, previously informal brotherhoods for building camaraderie, took on new significance under Horus's direction. Through Chaplain Erebus's influence, these lodges transformed into venues for discussion of the Warmaster's growing concerns about the Emperor's intentions. Selected officers were exposed to carefully curated information, suggesting that the Emperor planned to replace the Primarchs and their legions with more controllable forces once the Great Crusade concluded. These changes did not go entirely unnoticed. Garvil Loken and Tarek Torgadin observed the shifting atmosphere within the Legion with growing concern. The increased secrecy, the expansion of the Lodge's influence, and subtle alterations to compliance protocols all suggested a fundamental change in direction that contradicted the transparent command style Horus had previously championed. Their concerns intensified following the Davin campaign, when the Sons of Horus began incorporating new iconography into their heraldry. The Eye of Horus, previously a secondary symbol, gained prominence on armor and vehicles, often modified with subtle details that deviated from its traditional representation. Veterans noted that these variants bore uncomfortable similarities to symbols they had encountered on worlds where forbidden cult practices had taken root. Human remembrancers attached to the 63rd Expedition began to find their access to Legion activities increasingly restricted. Those who had previously enjoyed relatively free movement among the Astartes now found certain areas off-limits and certain topics discouraged. Several remembrancers who pressed too insistently for information about the Davin incident or the changing Legion practices found themselves reassigned to distant expedition fleets or recalled to Terra for nebulous administrative reasons. The Sons of Horus tactical doctrine also evolved in concerning ways. Where they had previously emphasized precise application of force to minimize civilian casualties and preserve infrastructure, post-Davin operations showed increasing disregard for collateral damage. Compliance actions that might previously have been resolved through negotiation or limited strikes now defaulted to overwhelming force as the first option rather than the last resort. The Oreshan technocracy campaign marked the first visible manifestation of the corruption festering within the Sons of Horus. This independent human civilization had successfully navigated the perils of Old Night, maintaining advanced technology and a stable society without imperial guidance. Under normal circumstances, such a civilization would have been approached with diplomatic overtures first, with military action reserved only for stubborn resistance. The Warmaster's fleet arrived in the Oreshan system, displaying full battle configuration, gun ports open, void shields raised, and drop ships prepped for immediate deployment. This aggressive posture contradicted established first contact protocols and alarmed several officers within the Legion, particularly Garvil Loken, who had expected a more measured approach to a human civilization showing no immediate hostile intent. The Oreshans responded to this show of force with understandable caution, deploying their own defensive fleet while still attempting to establish communication. Their technology, while not matching the most advanced Imperial systems, demonstrated remarkable innovation and adaptation. Of particular note were their unique energy weapons and void shield configurations that suggested technical knowledge potentially valuable to the Mechanicum. Horus dismissed the Oreshan diplomatic overtures without genuine consideration. In a strategy briefing aboard the Vengeful Spirit, he characterized the technocracy as hoarders of knowledge that rightfully belongs to all mankind, a justification for military action that rang hollow to those familiar with previous compliance operations. The Warmaster's unusually harsh demeanor silenced most objections, though Loken and Torgadin exchanged concerned glances that did not go unnoticed by their more observant battle brothers. The ensuing conflict displayed a level of brutality previously uncharacteristic of Sons of Horus operations. Civilian infrastructure became legitimate targets, with manufacturing centers and research facilities subjected to orbital bombardment rather than secured for their valuable contents. Oresian defenders were given no opportunity to surrender, with advance forces explicitly ordered to maximize enemy casualties rather than secure compliance. Most disturbing was an incident during the assault on the Oresian capital, where Horus personally led a strike force against the central governance complex. Upon securing the facility, the Warmaster discovered an artifact of obvious Xeno's origin, a blade of unusual design that seemed to absorb light around it. Rather than following standard protocol for Xeno's technology, which required immediate containment and transfer to Mechanicum authorities, Horus claimed the weapon for himself, dismissing the concerns of tech priest Regulus, who was present to evaluate captured technology. This blade, later identified as being of possible Necron origin, represented exactly the kind of forbidden technology that Imperial forces were tasked with containing. The Warmaster's willingness to not only handle such an artifact, but incorporate it into his personal armory, signaled a profound shift in his adherence to Imperial doctrine. More concerning still was his dismissive response when Loken cautiously raised the issue, suggesting that certain tools are too valuable to discard due to superstition, a statement that directly contradicted established Imperial policy regarding Xeno's technology. The aftermath of the Oresian campaign saw further troubling developments within the Legion. Veterans who had expressed reservations about the operation's conduct found themselves reassigned to non-combat duties or deployed to distant expeditionary forces. Meanwhile, officers who had embraced the more aggressive approach received promotions and commendations, creating an implicit incentive structure that rewarded brutality and discouraged adherence to traditional compliance protocols. Warrior Lodge meetings became increasingly secretive, with attendance restricted to those who had demonstrated unwavering loyalty to the Warmaster. Lodge ceremonies incorporated new elements, ritual scarification, blood oaths, and symbolic gestures that bore uncomfortable similarities to practices the Great Crusade had encountered on worlds where forbidden cult activity had taken root. Those who questioned these innovations found themselves subtly excluded from command decisions and strategic planning sessions. These changes did not go unnoticed by the more observant members of the Mournival. Loken and Torgeddon began documenting discrepancies between official reports and actual operations, noting particularly the increasing frequency with which civilian casualties were mischaracterized as enemy combatants. Their concerns intensified when they discovered that communication logs with Terra had been selectively edited, with certain messages from the Emperor and Malkador, the Sigillite, never reaching the Warmaster's inner circle. The growing division within the Legion came to a head following the Oresian campaign, when Horus announced his intention to bring the fleet to the Istvan system to suppress a reported rebellion. The selection of this particular system raised immediate questions among the strategic staff. Istvan held minimal strategic value, and the reported rebellion seemed minor compared to other compliance issues that might have warranted the Warmaster's personal attention. Nevertheless, the Sons of Horus set course for Istvan, accompanied by the World Eaters, Death Guard, and Emperor's Children, all legions whose Primarchs had grown increasingly close to Horus in recent months. Upon arrival at Istvan III, the true nature of Horus's corruption began to reveal itself. Rather than deploying the full legion against the planetary rebellion, the Warmaster ordered a selective force composition. Specific companies and individuals, primarily those suspected of harboring continued loyalty to the Emperor, were designated for the initial assault, while the bulk of the Legion remained in orbit aboard their vessels. The selection process for the ground forces was ostensibly based on tactical considerations, but the pattern became clear to those paying attention. Officers who had questioned recent orders maintained regular communication with Imperial authorities outside the Warmaster's control, or simply demonstrated too much interest in the Emperor's projects on Terra, found themselves assigned to the Istvan III deployment. Among them were Garvil Loken and Tariq Torgeddon, both Mournival members whose loyalty to the Emperor had remained steadfast despite their personal devotion to their Primarch. The initial assault proceeded according to standard protocols, with drop pods and assault craft delivering approximately 70,000 Astartes to the surface of Istvan III. These forces made rapid progress against the planetary defenders, securing key objectives and establishing forward operating bases in preparation for the main deployment. Loken, commanding elements of the 10th Company, noted with growing unease that their orbital support seemed unusually limited, with requests for bombardment of specific targets meeting unexplained delays. The true purpose of this selective deployment became horrifyingly clear when Horus ordered virus bombs deployed against the planet's surface. These weapons, containing the Life Eater virus, represented the most extreme sanction in the Imperial arsenal, typically reserved for Xenos infestations that could not be cleansed by conventional means. The virus consumed all organic matter, reducing living tissue to a flammable slurry within minutes of exposure. This bombardment targeted areas known to contain loyal Astartes forces, with no warning given to the troops on the ground. The first indication many had of their betrayal came when they observed the distinctive contrails of virus bombs entering the atmosphere above their positions. Some, like Loken and Torgeddon, recognized the danger immediately and sought shelter in sealed bunkers or environmental suits. Others, unable to reach protection in time, suffered the horrific effects of the Life Eater, their enhanced physiology providing no defense against its engineered virulence. The atmospheric saturation with flammable gases produced by the virus created conditions for the second phase of Horus's betrayal. A single lance strike from the battle barge Vengeful Spirit ignited the atmosphere, creating a global firestorm that swept across Istvan III's surface at supersonic speeds. The temperature of this conflagration was sufficient to melt ceramite armor, leaving even those Astartes who had survived the virus with no defense against the inferno that followed. Against all expectations, some loyalist Astartes survived both the virus and the subsequent firestorm. Loken, Torgeddon, and approximately 2,000 others had found shelter in the most hardened bunkers and sealed structures, emerging to find a landscape transformed into ash and glass. These survivors, representing elements from all 4 legions present in the system, quickly recognized their situation, betrayed by their Primarchs and stranded on a dead world with no hope of rescue. Rather than surrendering to despair, these loyalists organized a desperate resistance. Under the leadership of officers like Loken, Torgeddon, Saul Tarvitz of the Emperor's Children, and Nathaniel Garrow of the Death Guard, they established defensive positions in the ruins of the planetary capital. Their goal was not survival, which all recognized as impossible, but to exact as heavy a toll as possible on the traitor forces that would inevitably be sent to eliminate them. Horus, recognizing that the survival of loyal elements represented both a tactical problem and a potential source of intelligence leakage, dispatched ground forces to eliminate the remaining loyalists. Rather than relying on orbital bombardment, which had already proven insufficient to guarantee their elimination, he ordered a direct assault by traitor Astartes. This decision was partially practical. The ruins provided significant protection against bombardment, but also psychological, forcing the traitor legionaries to directly confront and kill their former brothers. The ground war on Istvan III's blasted surface lasted for nearly 2 months, a testament to the determination and tactical skill of the loyalist forces. Fighting from prepared positions in the ruins, the outnumbered loyalists inflicted disproportionate casualties on their former brothers. Every street and building became a killing ground, with loyalists employing ambush tactics, improvised explosives, and knowledge of their betrayer's doctrine to maximize enemy losses. For Loken and Torgeddon, the most painful aspect of this conflict was facing former comrades from their own legion. Men they had fought alongside for decades now came against them as enemies, wearing the same colors but serving a perverted version of their Primarch's vision. The psychological toll of this betrayal manifested in different ways. Torgeddon maintained his characteristic gallows humor even as the situation deteriorated, while Loken became increasingly introspective, documenting their experiences in the event that some record might survive to reach the Emperor. The final phase of the Istvan III atrocity came when Horus, growing impatient with the protracted ground war, dispatched his most trusted captains to end the resistance. Ezekiel Abaddon and Horus Aximand, the remaining members of the Mournival, led a strike force directly against the position held by Loken and Torgeddon. This confrontation between former Mournival brothers represented the personal dimension of the broader betrayal, men who had once considered themselves closer than blood now intent on killing one another. The duel between these former brothers was as much philosophical as physical. Abaddon and Aximand attempted to justify their betrayal, speaking of the Emperor's supposed plans to discard the Primarchs and establish himself as a god. Loken and Torghad countered with appeals to their oaths and the values the Luna Wolves had once embodied. Neither side could convince the other, leaving only violence to resolve their fundamental disagreement. The outcome of this confrontation saw Torghad fall to Aximand's blade, while Loken was left for dead beneath the rubble of a collapsed building following his duel with Abaddon. Contrary to the traitor's assumptions, however, Loken survived this encounter, though severely injured and psychologically traumatized. He would eventually be recovered by agents of Malkador the Sigillite and offered a place among the Knights Errant, a specialized force being assembled to counter Horus's betrayal through covert operations. With the Loyalist resistance on Istvan III finally eliminated, or so the traitors believed, Horus proceeded with the next phase of his rebellion. The Warmaster summoned 7 additional legions to the Istvan system, ostensibly to help suppress the rebellion, but actually to expand his treasonous coalition. 4 of these, the Iron Warriors, Alpha Legion, Wordbearers, and Night Lords, had already secretly pledged themselves to Horus's cause, while 3 others, the Raven Guard, Salamanders, and Iron Hands, remained loyal to the Emperor. The stage was thus set for an even greater betrayal at Istvan V. The Loyalist legions, acting on orders from Terra where Horus's treachery had finally been revealed thanks to Garro's warning, deployed to the planet's surface to confront the known traitor forces. The 4 secretly traitorous legions remained in reserve, ostensibly to support the Loyalists, but actually waiting to reveal their true allegiance at the most devastating moment. The Dropsite Massacre, as this event would come to be known, began with a conventional engagement between the loyal legions and Horus's forces. The Sons of Horus, now fully transformed in both appearance and doctrine, formed the center of the traitor line. Their armor, once pristine white, now displayed a distinctive sea green coloration with gold trim, while their tactical approach emphasized overwhelming brutality rather than the precise application of force that had characterized the Luna Wolves. The Sons of Horus emerged from the Dropsite Massacre with their position as the preeminent legion among the traitor forces firmly established. Horus, now openly declaring himself in rebellion against the Emperor, reorganized his forces for the drive toward Terra. The Warmaster understood that speed would be essential. Every day that passed allowed the Loyalist forces to strengthen their defenses and consolidate their positions. The campaign that followed would need to strike a delicate balance between rapid advancement and securing their supply lines against potential counterattacks. With the Loyalist legions at Istvan either destroyed or scattered, Horus divided his forces into several battle groups. The Sons of Horus would form the vanguard of the main thrust toward Terra, with supporting elements from the other traitor legions deployed according to their particular strengths. The World Eaters and Death Guard would serve as the hammer to the Sons of Horus' spear, providing overwhelming force where precision strikes proved insufficient. The Emperor's children, increasingly devoted to sensory excess rather than martial discipline, were assigned to planetary subjugation and compliance operations, roles that allowed them to indulge their growing appetites while still contributing to the strategic objective. The Sons of Horus themselves underwent further transformation as the rebellion gained momentum. Their armor, now a distinctive sea green with gold and black trim, incorporated increasingly elaborate trophy racks and personalizations that would have been considered violations of uniform code during their days as Luna Wolves. Many veterans adorned their plate with fetishes and totems of obvious ritual significance: wolf teeth, human bones, and stranger items harvested from conquered worlds. The Eye of Horus, once a symbol of vigilance and protection, gained additional elements that subtly referenced the ruinous powers, though few outside the Legion would recognize these esoteric markings. The Legion's combat doctrine evolved to match their changing nature. Where the Luna Wolves had prided themselves on surgical precision and minimal collateral damage, the Sons of Horus embraced terror as a weapon. Civilian populations were no longer carefully segregated from military targets, but treated as legitimate pressure points to force planetary surrenders. Compliance operations that might previously have emphasized negotiation and integration now defaulted to demonstrations of overwhelming force, with resistance met by exemplary destruction that would discourage others from similar defiance. This strategic shift was exemplified in the Shadow Crusade, a campaign conducted in parallel with Word-Bearer's forces that targeted the Ultramarines' realm of Ultramar. While Lorgar's legion focused on ritual desecration and corrupting planetary populations, the Sons of Horus elements concentrated on destroying military assets and infrastructure that might otherwise support the Loyalist war effort. The coordinated assault forced Roboute Guilliman to divert substantial forces to defend his home realm, preventing the Ultramarines from reinforcing Terra during the critical early phases of Horus's advance. Tactical innovation remained a hallmark of the Legion despite their moral corruption. Horus personally developed the Speartip escalation doctrine, which built upon their traditional preference for decapitation strikes, but incorporated new elements drawn from their warp-influenced capabilities. Initial assaults would target an enemy's command structure as before, but now included sorceress elements designed to sow confusion and terror among defending forces. Specialized units known as the Broken Blades, Astartes who had embraced particular aspects of chaos, would follow these initial strikes, exploiting the psychological damage to shatter enemy morale before conventional forces delivered the final blow. The Battle of Malech represented perhaps the clearest demonstration of the Sons of Horus at the height of their corrupted power. This fortress world held particular significance for Horus. He had visited it with the Emperor during the early Great Crusade, though his memories of that time had been psychically obscured until his corruption on Davin. Now, with his psychic potential awakened by chaos, he recognized Malech as a world containing a hidden gateway to the realm of the Chaos Gods, a portal the Emperor himself had once used to gain the knowledge necessary to create the Primarchs. The Imperial defenders of Malech included elements of the Night House Divine and substantial forces from several Titan legions, making it one of the most heavily fortified worlds in the Imperium. Rather than engaging this formidable defense network directly, Horus employed a strategy that leveraged both conventional military assets and the corrupting influence of the ruinous powers. Advance agents infiltrated House Divine, exploiting latent ambitions and resentments among its leadership to sow the seeds of betrayal that would bloom at the critical moment. When the Sons of Horus fleet emerged from the warp, the defenders initially responded according to established protocols, activating void shields and preparing to repel the expected orbital assault. Instead, Horus opened communication channels, engaging the planetary leadership in diplomatic overtures that seemed to suggest the possibility of peaceful resolution. This unexpected approach created confusion and debate among the defenders, buying time for the Warmaster's true strategy to unfold. As these negotiations proceeded, the corruption within House Divine reached critical mass. Night suits turned their weapons against loyal Imperial forces, creating devastating gaps in the defensive lines that Sons of Horus drop pods immediately exploited. The precision of this coordination demonstrated that the betrayal had been meticulously planned, with traitor elements receiving detailed operational briefings well before the Warmaster's arrival in the system. The ground war on Malech displayed the Sons of Horus at their most effective. Juster and Terminators teleported directly into key command bunkers, eliminating senior officers before they could organize an effective response to the betrayal unfolding around them. Tactical squads secured landing zones for the second wave, which included Abaddon's elite company and several specialized formations that had been specifically configured for this operation. The Warmaster himself led a strike force against the hidden portal facility, cutting through the most determined resistance with contemptuous ease. For the common soldiers defending Malech, the most terrifying aspect of the assault was not the military precision, but the otherworldly elements that accompanied it. Reports described Sons of Horus Astartes displaying capabilities beyond normal transhuman limits, moving with impossible speed, shrugging off wounds that should have been fatal, or emanating visible auras of supernatural dread that caused nearby defenders to flee in terror. These manifestations of chaos favor were most pronounced among the Warmaster's personal guard, who had embraced corruption more fully than the rank and file. The fall of Malech provided Horus with both strategic advantage and metaphysical power. The world's industrial capacity was substantial, with forge complexes capable of producing Titan components and advanced weapon systems that were immediately repurposed to support the traitor war effort. More significant was Horus's use of the hidden portal, through which he physically entered the realm of the Chaos Gods to secure further blessings and power. The details of what transpired during this journey remain largely unknown, but when the Warmaster returned, even his closest captains noted a change in him. His presence now carried an almost gravitational weight, and reality itself seemed to distort subtly in his vicinity. Following the Malech campaign, the Sons of Horus operational structure evolved further. The traditional company organization remained nominally in place, but increasingly, forces were organized around cult affiliations that corresponded to the four major chaos powers. Warriors who displayed particular affinity for Khorne's martial aspects formed assault units that specialized in close-quarters brutality. Those drawn to Tzeentch's complexity and change became involved in intelligence operations and strategic planning. Nurgle's resilience appealed to veterans who valued endurance above all else, while Slaanesh attracted those who sought perfection in their martial skills. This cult-based organization was never formalized to the degree seen in other traitor legions. The Sons of Horus maintained their primary identity as the Warmasters, rather than dedicating themselves wholly to any single aspect of chaos. This approach reflected Horus's own relationship with the ruinous powers, whom he viewed as tools and allies rather than masters. The Warmaster accepted their gifts and deployed their power toward his objectives, but maintained the fiction, at least to himself, that he remained in control of the relationship. The advance toward Terra accelerated following Malech, with the Sons of Horus securing several key systems that formed a corridor through which supply lines could be maintained. The Beta Garmin campaign represented the final major obstacle before the approach to the Sol system itself. This cluster of star systems, known collectively as the Sentinel Worlds, contained formidable defenses that had been continuously strengthened since the earliest days of the Heresy, when Malkador the Sigillite recognized their strategic importance. The conflict at Beta Garmin lasted over 200 days and involved elements from 9 legions across both sides. The Sons of Horus committed approximately 70,000 Astartes to the campaign, representing the largest single deployment of the Legion during the Heresy. The fighting encompassed void warfare, planetary assaults, and protracted sieges, testing every aspect of the Legion's capabilities against determined loyalist resistance. Throughout the Beta Garmin campaign, Horus demonstrated why he had been named Warmaster. His strategic orchestration of multiple Legion forces showed a mastery of combined arms warfare that none of his brother Primarchs could match. The Sons of Horus served as his personal instrument, deployed at critical junctures where their particular combination of tactical flexibility and overwhelming force could break deadlocks or exploit momentary advantages. The Titan Death, as the Beta Garmin conflict became known, saw unprecedented deployment of Titan legions by both sides. The Sons of Horus developed specialized anti-Titan tactics that leveraged their mobility against the larger war machines. Assault squads equipped with melta weapons would target leg joints and weapon systems, while dreadnoughts configured for close combat would attempt to scale the massive war machines to attack vulnerable sensor, arrays, or weapon mounts. These tactics proved surprisingly effective, allowing Astartes forces to neutralize war machines that conventionally would have required counter-Titan assets to engage. With the fall of Beta Garmin, the path to Terra lay open. The Sons of Horus led the final approach to the Sol system, their fleet having swelled with vessels from across the traitor forces. Navigating the complex currents of the warp became increasingly difficult as they neared Terra, where the Astronomican's power created turbulence that challenged even the most skilled navigators. This difficulty was compounded by the psychic weight of Horus himself, whose corrupted presence distorted the immaterium around his fleet. The Siege of Terra represented the culmination of the Sons of Horus's transformation from the Emperor's Praetorians to the vanguard of chaos. The Legion deployed in full strength, with companies organized according to their specialized roles in the assault plan. Breacher squads equipped with thermal charges and graviton rams would target sections of the palace walls identified as structural weaknesses. Behind them came assault companies prepared to exploit any openings, while heavy support squads provided covering fire to suppress loyalist defenders on the battlements. Horus directed the siege from his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, coordinating the efforts of the various traitor legions while monitoring the progress of his specialized formations. The Sons of Horus secured several key breaches during the early phases of the siege, most notably at the Eternity Gate, where Abaddon's Justaerin Terminators penetrated deep enough into the palace complex to threaten the Sanctum Imperialis itself before being driven back by combined forces from the Blood Angels and Imperial Fists. As the siege progressed and the palace defenses proved more resilient than anticipated, Horus recognized that time was working against him. Intelligence reports indicated that loyalist reinforcements were en route to Terra, threatening to catch the traitor forces in a pincer movement that could prove disastrous. The Warmaster made the fateful decision to lower the void shields on the Vengeful Spirit, effectively inviting the Emperor to teleport aboard for a final confrontation that would decide the fate of the Imperium. The Emperor accepted this challenge, teleporting aboard the Vengeful Spirit accompanied by a force that included Sanguinius, Primarch of the Blood Angels, and a contingent of Legio Custodes. The Sons of Horus had prepared extensively for this moment, with the ship's interior reconfigured into a lethal maze designed to separate the Emperor from his companions and channel him toward the bridge where Horus awaited. Specialized ambush teams comprising the Legion's most capable warriors were positioned at key junctions, their sole purpose to delay and weaken the loyalist forces as they fought their way toward the Warmaster. The final confrontation between Horus and the Emperor occurred on the Vengeful Spirit's bridge, a space that had been transformed by the Warmaster's full embrace of chaos. Reality itself seemed unstable, with surfaces shifting and distorting in ways that defied physical laws. The Sons of Horus had been cleared from this area, with only the Warmaster himself present to meet his creator in personal combat. What transpired during this duel is known only through fragmentary accounts and later mythologizing, but the outcome changed the course of Imperial history. The Emperor prevailed, but at terrible cost. Horus was utterly destroyed, his physical form obliterated, and his soul annihilated by the full unleashing of the Emperor's psychic might. The Master of Mankind himself was mortally wounded, his broken body recovered by loyalist forces, and returned to Terra for installation upon the golden throne that would sustain his ruined form for the next 10,000 years. For the Sons of Horus, the death of their Primarch created an immediate existential crisis. The Legion had defined itself through Horus's vision and leadership. Without him, they found themselves not only defeated but fundamentally purposeless. As loyalist reinforcements arrived in the Sol system, the traitor forces began a fighting withdrawal that would come to be known as the Scouring. The Sons of Horus, now under Abaddon's de facto leadership, were among the first to retreat, using specialized rearguard actions to cover the withdrawal of their remaining assets. The journey to the region that would become known as the Eye of Terror was fraught with danger and internal conflict. Without Horus's overwhelming presence to maintain Legion cohesion, old rivalries and new power struggles emerged among the surviving captains. Abaddon, though widely acknowledged as the most capable successor, faced challenges from several quarters, including remnants of the Mournival, who questioned whether the Legion should continue at all without their Primarch. The aftermath of Horus's death left the Sons of Horus in disarray. As the Vengeful Spirit broke from Terra's orbit, Ezekiel Abaddon stood on the command deck, staring at the bloodstained location where his Primarch had fallen. The Legion's retreat was not the orderly withdrawal of a force preserving its strength for future battles, but the desperate flight of warriors whose very purpose had been obliterated along with their Gene Father. The Sons of Horus fled through increasingly hostile territory as loyalist forces, energized by the Emperor's sacrifice and enraged by the traitor's actions, pursued them relentlessly. White Scar's fast attack squadrons harried their flanks, while Ultramarines' battle groups systematically cut off potential safe havens. With each engagement, the once mighty Legion diminished further, losing warriors, vessels, and equipment they could not replace. This period, which would later be called the Scouring, saw the fragmentation of the Sons of Horus command structure. Company captains who had once operated under Horus's unified vision now pursued individual survival strategies. Some sought to carve out territories in distant systems, others attempted to negotiate separate terms with advancing loyalist forces, while the most devoted followed Abaddon toward the roiling warp storms of the Eye of Terror, the only region of space where the Emperor's forces could not easily follow. Abaddon's authority during this retreat was tenuous at best. Though respected for his combat prowess and position as first captain, he lacked the overwhelming charisma and strategic genius that had made Horus the natural leader of both his legion and the broader rebellion. Several challengers emerged from within the legion's ranks, most notably Falcus Kibber, captain of the Justaerin, who advocated continuing the push toward Terra despite Horus's fall. These power struggles frequently devolved into bloodshed, further weakening the already battered legion. The physical transformation of the Sons of Horus accelerated during their flight to the Eye. Warriors who had maintained some semblance of their original appearance now embraced corruption fully, their armor fusing with flesh in grotesque configurations that reflected their inner turmoil. The legions see green coloration darken to a sickly black green on many warriors, while gold trim tarnished to dull bronze. These changes were not merely aesthetic, but reflected the deepening influence of chaos upon warriors who had lost their primary anchor to purpose and identity. Upon reaching the Eye of Terror in approximately the early 31st millennium, the Sons of Horus established their primary base on a world that would come to be known as Maleum. This planet, chosen for its defensible position and relative stability within the Eye's shifting geography, became the Legion's sanctuary and prison. Here, they constructed a fortress monastery reminiscent of their original headquarters on Thonia, though corrupted by the influence of the warp that permeated everything within the Eye. The centerpiece of this fortress was a vast mausoleum built to house Horus's corpse, which had been recovered from the vengeful spirit before loyalist forces could claim it. The Warmaster's body, though lifeless, remained largely intact, preserved by the tremendous energies that had suffused it during his elevation by the Chaos Gods. This corpse became both shrine and symbol for the remnants of the Sons of Horus, a physical reminder of their lost glory and the focus of increasingly elaborate funerary rites that developed in the decades following their retreat. These rites reflected the Legion's psychological state, caught between reverence for their fallen Primarch and bitter resentment over his failure. Warriors would process through the mausoleum, reciting litanies that commemorated the Legion's greatest victories, while simultaneously cursing the weaknesses that had led to their ultimate defeat. Some captains advocated attempting to resurrect Horus through warp sorcery, while others insisted that his failure proved his unworthiness, and that the Legion should forge a new identity entirely. This period of mourning and recrimination lasted for decades, during which the Sons of Horus became increasingly insular and defensive. Raids against Imperial targets continued, but were primarily motivated by necessity rather than strategic objectives, gathering slaves, materials, and equipment needed to maintain their dwindling strength. The Legion's numbers, once over 100,000 at the height of the Great Crusade, had been reduced to perhaps 10,000 effective warriors, with many of those suffering from mutations or battle injuries that would have seen them removed from active service in earlier times. The stagnation of the Sons of Horus created opportunity for their rivals among the other traitor legions. The Emperor's children, now fully devoted to Slaanesh and led by various warlords following Fulgrim's ascension to demonhood, launched a surprise attack on Maleum approximately a century after the Legion had established their fortress there. This assault, motivated by both practical concerns and the increasingly bizarre desires of Slaanesh's followers, targeted not only the Sons of Horus's remaining military assets, but specifically the mausoleum containing Horus's corpse. The raid succeeded beyond the Emperor's children's expectations. The Sons of Horus, complacent in their isolation and weakened by internal conflicts, mounted an ineffective defense. The Emperor's children penetrated the inner sanctum of the fortress and stole Horus's corpse, withdrawing before a coordinated counterattack could be organized. This theft represented the nadir of the Legion's fall. Not only had they failed their Primarch in life, but they had now failed to protect even his remains. The loss of Horus's body triggered a profound crisis within the Legion. For many veterans, this final indignity shattered whatever remnants of pride and purpose they had maintained. Some abandoned the Legion entirely, becoming independent warlords or mercenaries within the Eye. Others fell into fatalistic despair, seeking death in increasingly reckless engagements against Imperial forces or rival Chaos bands. The Legion, which had already been fracturing, seemed on the verge of dissolution. It was at this critical juncture that Abaddon finally emerged as the Legion's true successor to Horus. Having disappeared for a time following the retreat to the Eye, the first captain returned transformed, both physically and in purpose. Where he had once been Horus's most devoted son, he now rejected the Warmaster's legacy, declaring that Horus had failed by allowing himself to be used as a pawn by the Chaos gods rather than mastering them as tools for his ambition. Abaddon's declaration represented a radical break with the Legion's past. In a symbolic gesture that emphasized this rupture, he renamed the Sons of Horus as the Black Legion, changing their colors from sea green to a uniform black that represented both mourning for their past and the blank slate upon which their new identity would be written. The Eye of Horus remained as their primary iconography, but now represented Abaddon's watchfulness rather than their connection to their Primarch. More significant than these symbolic changes was Abaddon's strategic vision. Rather than attempting to simply continue Horus's failed rebellion, he declared a long war against the Imperium, a conflict measured in centuries rather than years, focused on systematic degradation of Imperial strength rather than a direct assault on Terra. This approach acknowledged the Legion's diminished capabilities while providing a framework for gradual rebuilding and eventual revenge. Abaddon's first priority was consolidating his authority within the newly christened Black Legion. Warriors who could not accept the new direction were given a simple choice: submit, leave, or die. Many veterans, particularly those who had been most devoted to Horus's cult of personality, chose exile rather than bend knee to the first captain. Others challenged Abaddon directly, resulting in a series of duels that demonstrated his enhanced abilities and ruthless determination. With internal opposition eliminated, Abaddon turned to external threats. The Emperor's children who had stolen Horus's body became the targets of a systematic campaign of retribution. Over several decades, Abaddon's forces tracked down and eliminated the key participants in the raid on Malium, eventually locating Horus's corpse in the possession of a Slaaneshi warband led by the former Emperor's children apothecary Fabius Bile. The exact fate of the Warmaster's remains disputed in Imperial records, but most accounts suggest that Abaddon destroyed the body completely, severing the final physical link between the Black Legion and their progenitor. The transformation from Sons of Horus to Black Legion involved more than a change in name and colors. Under Abaddon's direction, the Legion's tactical doctrine evolved away from the spear-tip approach that had characterized the Luna Wolves and Sons of Horus. Instead, the Black Legion developed a more flexible operational model that emphasized adaptability and incorporated elements from all Chaos powers rather than favoring any single patron. This doctrinal shift reflected a broader change in the Legion's composition. Abaddon actively recruited warriors from other traitor legions who had become disillusioned with their own Primarchs or Legion cultures. Night Lords who chafed under their Legion's increasing fragmentation, World Eaters who sought more strategic purpose than Khorne's endless demands for slaughter, and even loyalist Astartes who had turned traitor in the millennia following the heresy, all found places within the Black Legion's ranks if they proved their worth and accepted Abaddon's authority. The integration of these diverse elements created a force fundamentally different from the original Luna Wolves. Where Horus's Legion had been characterized by brotherhood and shared purpose derived from their Primarch, the Black Legion became a meritocracy bound together by pragmatic allegiance to Abaddon and hatred of the Imperium. This heterogeneous composition provided tactical versatility but required stronger discipline to maintain cohesion, leading to the development of the inner circle known as the Azacarian. Abaddon's most trusted captains, who ensured his directives, were implemented throughout the Legion. Despite these changes, echoes of the Luna Wolves' original character persisted within the Black Legion. The emphasis on elite shock troops remained, though now manifested through Terminator-armored Chosen rather than the Justarin. The tradition of warrior lodges evolved into more formalized cult structures, maintaining the function of building bonds between warriors outside the standard chain of command. Most significantly, the Black Legion retained the Luna Wolves' pragmatic approach to warfare, valuing effectiveness over ritual or tradition. The influence of the Luna Wolves extended beyond their direct descendants in the Black Legion. Several loyalist chapters created during the Second Founding incorporated elements of Luna Wolves' doctrine, particularly those descended from legions that had fought alongside Horus during the Great Crusade. The White Scar's successors, known as the Storm Lords, adopted variations of the Speartip Assault doctrine, while certain Imperial Fist successors incorporated Luna Wolves' void warfare techniques into their own operations. More subtly, the Luna Wolves' fall served as a cautionary example that shaped loyalist chapter culture in the millennia following the heresy. The close brotherhood that had characterized the Legion and contributed to their collective fall led many loyalist chapters to implement structures specifically designed to prevent similar corruption. The Codex Astartes' emphasis on dividing legions into smaller chapters derived partly from analysis of how rapidly corruption had spread throughout the Sons of Horus, once Horus himself turned traitor. Within the Imperium, the memory of the Luna Wolves underwent systematic erasure, a process known as damnatio memoriae in ancient Terran tradition. Imperial records were purged of positive references to the Legion, with their achievements either attributed to other forces or simply deleted from historical accounts. Monuments and trophies earned during their loyal service were destroyed or defaced, while the name Luna Wolves itself became effectively forbidden in Imperial discourse, referred to only as the 16th when historical context required mention. This erasure extended to the Legion's homeworld of Thonia. Imperial records are unclear on the planet's ultimate fate, with some sources suggesting it was destroyed completely during the Scouring, while others indicate it simply fell into the warp storms that expanded following the heresy. What is certain is that Thonia no longer exists as an accessible world within the Imperium, its mining culture and warrior traditions surviving only in the corrupted memories of ancient Black Legion veterans. The psychological impact of the Luna Wolves' betrayal resonated throughout Imperial culture. The speed with which the Emperor's most favored legion turned against him created deep-seated suspicion of transhuman warriors that persists into the 41st millennium. The administrative separation between Astartes chapters and other Imperial institutions, the carefully limited resource allocation to Space Marine forces, and the Inquisition's constant vigilance against Astartes' overreach all stem directly from the trauma inflicted by Horus's rebellion. For the Black Legion, the Luna Wolves' legacy represents both foundation and counterpoint. Abaddon's forces have launched 13 Black Crusades against the Imperium over 10,000 years, each building upon tactical doctrines first developed during the Great Crusade while simultaneously rejecting the strategic failures that led to Horus's defeat. The most recent and most successful of these campaigns, the 13th Black Crusade, finally achieved what Horus could not: the fracturing of the Imperium through the creation of the Great Rift, a massive warp storm that has divided the galaxy in two. This success vindicates Abaddon's patient approach to the Long War, demonstrating that his rejection of Horus's methods was strategically sound. Yet even in this triumph, the shadow of the Luna Wolves remains. Many of the Black Legion's most effective tactics against Imperial forces derive directly from knowledge of Astartes psychology and Imperial military doctrine first mastered during their loyal service. The Speartip concept, though modified for their current purposes, remains recognizable in the Black Legion's use of elite strike forces to target command structures and critical infrastructure. The ultimate legacy of the Luna Wolves lies in this duality: a legion that represented the pinnacle of the Emperor's vision for transhuman warriors, whose fall demonstrated the fundamental flaws in that vision. Their transformation from loyal spearhead to corrupted betrayers to fragmented remnants to reforged Black Legion traces the larger arc of the Imperium itself, an institution founded on noble ambitions that has become warped by necessity and circumstance into something its creator would scarcely recognize. 10,000 years after Horus's death, the Imperium still bears the scars of his betrayal, while the Black Legion continues to exploit the weaknesses his rebellion exposed. In this sense, the legacy of the Luna Wolves endures not despite the efforts to erase them from history, but because their impact was too fundamental to be forgotten. They remain the standard against which both loyalty and treachery are measured, the legion that came closest to both fulfilling the Emperor's dream and destroying it completely.